Chosen one, for God's sake perform this in public fast. Let all see, ladies and gentlemen, there comes a moment in every generation when silence is no longer wisdom and hesitation is no longer patience, but disobedience. We gather here today not for entertainment, not for emotional comfort, and not for motivational noise, but for a divine confrontation with truth. This is not a soft message. This is not a convenient message. This is a message for those who have been marked, called, and separated, whether they like it or not. Ladies and gentlemen, there are instructions from God that feel safe when kept private. They live quietly in the heart, protected from criticism, shielded from rejection, hidden from judgment. But there are other instructions, weightier, sharper, more urgent, that demand visibility. Instructions that cannot remain concealed without consequence. And it is these instructions that bring us here today. Some of you have felt it for months, a restlessness you could not explain, a pressure in your spirit that refuses to lift, a knowing that something must be done, spoken, shown, or released, but done openly. You prayed about it, you fasted over it, you waited for the fear to disappear, yet the instruction did not change, only the urgency increased. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the tension of calling. It is the moment when God stops negotiating with your comfort and begins insisting on your obedience. Not because he is harsh, but because time is critical. What he has placed inside certain individuals in this room is not for private survival, it is for public impact. We are living in an age where people applaud belief as long as it remains hidden. Faith is tolerated when it stays quiet. Convictions are celebrated only when they do not disrupt the crowd. But God has never advanced his purposes through invisible obedience alone. History shifts when someone dares to obey where all can see. Today's message is not for everyone. It is for the one who knows they have delayed, the one who felt the instruction and chose caution, the one who told themselves, I will do it later when the time feels right. And yet, deep down, you know the time already came and passed. Ladies and gentlemen, understand this. Delay does not always look like rebellion. Sometimes it looks like waiting. Sometimes it disguises itself as wisdom. But when God has spoken clearly, delay becomes costly. Not because God withdraws, but because momentum is lost. This gathering is a divine interruption, a line drawn in the sand between obedience and regret, between visibility and stagnation, between fear of man and reverence for God. What you are about to hear is not meant to impress you, it is meant to activate you. Because the instruction God gave you was never meant to remain hidden. It was meant to be seen, witnessed, and responded to. Ladies and gentlemen, the question is no longer whether God spoke. The question is whether you will obey in public. Public obedience is not a performance, it is a trigger. It is the moment when what God has already decided begins to move at a speed you could never manufacture in private. There are instructions that function slowly when hidden, but when carried out openly, they release acceleration. Things that would have taken years suddenly compress into weeks. Delays dissolve, resistance weakens, doors swing open without force. This is not coincidence, it is design. God does not ask for public obedience to embarrass you. He asks for it because visibility shortens distance. When you obey in private, heaven records it. When you obey in public, heaven responds to it. The visible act becomes a signal, a declaration that fear no longer governs your choices. And once fear is removed, speed is released. Many chosen ones misunderstand this principle. They believe obedience alone is enough, regardless of where or how it is expressed. But God operates in dimensions, not excuses. There are seasons where secrecy is protection, yes, but there are seasons where secrecy becomes delay. When God shifts you into a season of public obedience, he is not changing the instruction, he is changing the pace. Acceleration requires exposure. When you act publicly, you collapse timelines. What was scheduled to unfold gradually is forced into motion because your obedience aligns with God's urgency. Heaven moves quickly when you move boldly. The reason some promises feel stalled is not because God is slow, it is because the obedience required to activate speed has not yet been completed in the way he specified. Understand this. God does not accelerate what you are still hiding. The public act removes ambiguity. It declares finality. It says, this is no longer a discussion. And once something is no longer debated in the spirit, momentum begins. That is why public obedience feels heavy before it happens and light afterward. You are carrying the weight of hesitation, not the weight of the instruction. Acceleration does not come from effort, it comes from alignment. And alignment is proven by action, not intention. God has already measured your faith in private. Now He is measuring your trust. Trust says, I will do what you said, where you said, how you said, without editing it for comfort. Public obedience strips you of backups. It removes the option to retreat quietly. And God accelerates those who cannot turn back. When there is no exit plan, heaven supplies momentum. This is why things suddenly move once you finally obey openly. The same prayer you've been praying for months gets answered quickly. The same resistance that once felt immovable suddenly weakens. The same people who ignored you begin to respond. It is not that God changed His mind, it is that you met the condition for speed. There are witnesses assigned to your obedience, not for validation, but for verification. God allows others to see, so there can be no confusion about the source of what follows. When acceleration happens after public obedience, it removes the illusion that you did it yourself. The timing becomes too precise, the shift too sudden, the outcome too aligned. And this is important. Acceleration is not always comfortable. Speed exposes weakness, it stretches capacity, it forces growth. That is why God waits until you obey publicly, because public obedience signals readiness for rapid expansion. You are telling God, I am no longer managing perception, I am submitting to purpose. Many people want accelerated blessings without accelerated responsibility, but acceleration increases accountability. Once things move fast, excuses are no longer tolerated. Public obedience proves that you are willing to be held accountable, not just by God, but by reality. This is why fear tries to intervene right before the public act. Fear knows that once you step forward openly, the slow season ends. Stagnation thrives in secrecy. Momentum thrives in exposure. The chosen one who obeys publicly does not need to chase opportunities. Opportunities begin to chase alignment. People, resources, clarity. Everything moves toward the one who has demonstrated trust without conditions. God accelerates obedience that is complete. Partial obedience creates partial movement. Private obedience creates internal growth. But public obedience creates external motion. Look at your life honestly. Where have you obeyed quietly but resisted openly? Where did God tell you to speak, to step, to release, to show up, to stand firm where others could see, and you chose delay? That area marks where acceleration has been waiting. Heaven is not confused about what to do next. It is waiting for you to remove hesitation. The moment you act publicly, you authorize speed, not because God needed permission, but because you needed alignment. Acceleration also serves another purpose. It protects you from retreat. When things move quickly, you cannot second guess what you already stepped into. God accelerates the obedient so they do not sabotage themselves with overthinking. Speed becomes mercy. This is why once you finally obey publicly, things seem to fall into place. You didn't force anything. You simply stepped into alignment, and alignment produced motion. Public obedience acts like a catalyst. It does not create power, it releases what already exists. The reason God insists on public obedience at certain moments is because the next phase of your life cannot be built on hidden foundations alone. Visibility is required for expansion. Growth that stays invisible eventually suffocates. Public obedience announces that you are ready to be trusted with more. More influence, more responsibility, more impact. God accelerates those who are no longer afraid of being seen doing what He said. And once acceleration begins, it does not stop easily. Momentum builds upon momentum. Obedience compounds. What started as one visible act becomes a series of swift outcomes. You look back and realize how much time was lost waiting for courage instead of acting on conviction. The speed you desire is on the other side of the obedience you keep postponing. God has already planned the acceleration. The only missing element is your visible yes. Silence once served you. It kept you safe when you were growing, forming, being shaped. God allowed you to move quietly while your roots went deep. In that season, privacy was protection, hiddenness was wisdom. Not everyone needed access to what God was doing in you. Not everyone deserved a front row seat to your becoming. And God Himself concealed you because exposure before preparation would have crushed you. But that season has ended. What once protected you is now restraining you. The same silence that preserved you then will now delay you if you cling to it. God is not contradicting Himself, He is advancing you. Protection has shifted its form. It no longer looks like hiding, it now looks like visibility. Silence is no longer your shield. Many chosen ones misunderstand this transition. They assume staying quiet keeps them safe from criticism, opposition, misunderstanding, or attack. But there comes a point where silence actually invites more resistance than obedience ever would. When God has instructed you to move publicly and you remain hidden, you place yourself out of alignment, and misalignment is far more dangerous than exposure. The enemy does not fear your private faith, he fears your visible obedience. As long as you stay silent, your influence is contained. As long as you remain unseen, your authority stays localized. But once you step into visibility, something shifts. Your obedience becomes disruptive, not to people, but to systems, patterns, and spiritual resistance that relied on your absence. This is why fear intensifies when God calls you out of hiding. Fear senses loss of control. It whispers, stay quiet, stay low, stay safe. But God says, come forward, be seen, stand. Visibility is not about attention, it is about alignment. There are assignments that cannot be fulfilled quietly. There are breakthroughs that will not arrive until your obedience becomes observable. God is not trying to expose you to harm. He is positioning you where grace can defend you openly. What God protects publicly cannot be destroyed privately. Silence worked when your assignment was internal. Now your assignment is external. Understand this clearly. Hiding during a season of visibility creates vulnerability. When God says, let it be seen, and you resist, you step outside the perimeter of protection He designed for that season. Obedience is always the safest place, even when it feels risky. There are people who would never oppose you if you obeyed publicly, but become emboldened when you hesitate. Delay communicates uncertainty. Silence invites interference. Visibility shuts mouths because clarity leaves no room for speculation. When you obey openly, God takes responsibility for the outcome. This is what many fail to grasp. Private obedience places responsibility on you. Public obedience transfers responsibility to God. When you act where all can see, you are essentially saying, if this fails, let it fail in the open. And God does not allow His instructions to fail publicly. His reputation is involved. That is why visibility becomes protection. God defends what He displays. Think about it. When you remain hidden, you are constantly managing perception, anticipating reactions, protecting yourself from imagined threats. But when you obey openly, you stop managing and start trusting. You let God handle perception, opposition, and outcomes. That surrender activates a higher level of covering. Silence keeps you small. Visibility stretches you. But stretching is how strength is revealed. The fear that tells you visibility is dangerous is outdated. It belongs to a former version of you. The current version has grown beyond needing concealment. God is not calling you out to embarrass you. He is calling you out because you can now withstand the weight of being seen. And hear this, visibility does not mean everyone will understand you, but it does mean no one will be confused about where you stand. Confusion thrives in silence. Clarity thrives in exposure. The reason God is insisting on visibility is because the next phase requires witnesses, not spectators, witnesses, people who will later testify, I saw it, I was there, I watched it unfold. What God is about to do in your life is meant to be undeniable. Silence robs others of confirmation. There are people who need to see your obedience to break their own hesitation. Your visibility is not for validation, it is for activation. God uses seen obedience to unlock unseen faith in others. And here is the uncomfortable truth. Some of the resistance you fear will only exist as long as you remain silent. Once you obey openly, opposition loses leverage. When your stance is clear, arguments weaken. When your obedience is visible, speculation dies. Hiding prolongs conflict. Visibility resolves it. God is not asking you to be loud for attention. He is asking you to be visible for authority. Authority requires position, and position requires presence. You cannot lead from hiding. You cannot influence from silence. You cannot protect what you refuse to acknowledge openly. This is why the instruction feels urgent. You are exposed whether you move or not, but only obedience gives you coverage. Staying silent does not keep you safe anymore. It keeps you stagnant. Visibility is the new protection because it places you exactly where God is watching closely. When you step forward publicly, you move into a zone of increased oversight. Increased oversight brings increased defense. The fear of being seen is natural, but it is no longer useful. That fear served you when you were forming. Now it serves as resistance. God is not removing fear first. He is asking you to move despite it. Courage follows obedience, not the other way around. Once you obey openly, fear diminishes rapidly because uncertainty disappears. The unknown is what fuels anxiety. Public obedience eliminates ambiguity. You finally know where you stand, and so does everyone else. Silence keeps you guessing. Visibility settles the matter. God is calling you out not because He wants attention, but because He wants alignment, protection, and impact operating together. The days of hiding behind wisdom, timing, and preparation are over. Preparation has already been completed. Now comes demonstration, and demonstration cannot happen in silence. A prophetic signal is not noise, it is an announcement to realms you cannot see that a decision has been finalized. When God instructs you to act publicly, He is not asking for a gesture, He is asking for a signal, something that marks a shift, something that declares this phase is over, a new one has begun. In the language of the Spirit, visible obedience is a broadcast. Private belief shapes you. Action moves environments. There are moments when prayer alone is sufficient. There are seasons when faith is tested in the quiet. But there are turning points where heaven waits for a signal, something observable, undeniable, and deliberate. Your public act becomes that signal. It tells heaven you are ready. It tells resistance to move. It tells delay that its assignment has expired. Prophetic signals are never accidental. They are precise acts performed at specific times. When God tells you to do something openly, timing matters as much as obedience. A delayed signal weakens impact. A timely signal shifts atmospheres instantly. This is why urgency surrounds the instruction. A prophetic signal works because it aligns three dimensions at once: intention, action, and witness. Intention alone stays internal. Action without witnesses lacks authority. But when intention becomes action in the presence of witnesses, it becomes a declaration that cannot be ignored. Heaven responds to declarations, not intentions. Your public act does not inform God. He already knows your heart. It informs the environment. It alters what is permitted to operate around you. Spiritual resistance thrives on ambiguity. It feeds on hesitation and hiddenness. But a prophetic signal removes ambiguity. It draws a line that cannot be crossed quietly. This is why the enemy works so hard to keep you from acting publicly. He does not fear your private prayers nearly as much as your visible obedience. Because once the signal is released, the rules change. What was allowed to linger must leave. What was delayed must accelerate. A prophetic signal marks territory. When you obey publicly, you are claiming ground. You are saying, "This belongs to God now." And once territory is claimed openly, heaven enforces it. Private claims invite negotiation. Public claims invite enforcement. Think about how often God required visible actions before movement occurred, not because He needed proof, but because the act itself carried authority. The signal preceded the shift. Your life is no different. Right now, there is a standstill in certain areas, not because God is withholding, but because the signal has not yet been released. Heaven is waiting for a visible confirmation that you are in agreement with what God has already decided. The act itself carries prophetic weight. It is not about the size of the action, it is about its clarity. A prophetic signal does not need to be dramatic, it needs to be obedient. Simple acts done publicly at God's instruction often carry more power than complex efforts done privately. When you obey openly, you are aligning with a moment that was scheduled long before you became aware of it. Prophetic timing feels urgent because it is precise. Mistiming does not cancel purpose, but it does increase resistance. That is why God says, do it now. Public acts are not just for today, they echo, they establish precedent. Once a prophetic signal is released, it continues to speak long after the moment has passed. It tells your future that hesitation is no longer an option. It trains your spirit to respond quickly. It conditions your life for momentum. And witnesses matter. Not because you need approval, but because witnesses anchor reality. When others see the act, it becomes documented. It cannot be dismissed as imagination or coincidence. Witnesses solidify shifts. They confirm transitions. They mark endings and beginnings. This is why God often includes others in moments of transition. Witnesses seal prophetic acts. The fear you feel is not about embarrassment, it is about finality. Once the act is done publicly, there is no pretending it didn't happen, no quiet retreat, no rewriting the story, and that finality terrifies hesitation. But heaven honors finality. When you act publicly, you close doors behind you, and God moves fastest when doors are closed decisively. Open doors create options, closed doors create focus. Focus creates power. A prophetic signal also confuses resistance. What the enemy anticipated you would postpone, you complete. What he expected you to do quietly, you do openly. This sudden clarity disrupts strategies built on delay and fear. Momentum begins when resistance loses its script. Your public obedience also sends a signal inward. It reorders you. It breaks patterns of overthinking and self-protection. It trains your will to align with instruction rather than emotion. That internal alignment is just as powerful as the external shift. Once you release the signal, things begin to move. Without explanation, people change, circumstances rearrange, opportunities surface, opposition weakens. Not because you forced anything, but because the environment received the message. The signal said, this one has decided. God responds quickly to decision, not indecision, not contemplation. Decision. Public acts declare decision. This is why God does not always give you the full picture before asking for the act. The act is what unlocks the next instruction. Prophetic signals open channels. Once the signal is released, clarity follows. Waiting for clarity before acting is backwards in prophetic moments. Action produces clarity. Your obedience in public is not reckless, it is responsive. It is saying, I trust the instruction more than my understanding. That trust releases authority. Authority reshapes outcomes. Some of what you have been praying for requires no further prayer, only a signal. Heaven is ready, the atmosphere is charged, the instruction has been given. What remains is the act, and it must be seen, because unseen signals do not shift shared environments. Public acts change communal spaces. They affect not only you, but everyone connected to you. Your obedience becomes a point of reference. Others will measure time as before that happened and after that happened. That is prophetic impact. Once the signal is released, you do not need to explain it. You do not need to defend it. Signals speak for themselves. Heaven responds, and the results answer questions you never could. The public act is not the reward, it is the release. And once released, what was held back no longer has permission to stay. There is a kind of faith that comforts the proud, and there's a kind of faith that exposes them. God is not impressed by hidden confidence that never challenges the systems built on ego, control, and self sufficiency. When God calls you to visible faith, He is not elevating you for attention, He is positioning you as a contrast. Your obedience becomes a mirror, and the proud do not like what it reveals. Pride thrives where faith stays quiet. As long as belief remains invisible, arrogance goes unchallenged. Systems rooted in human strength continue uninterrupted. Titles, reputations, hierarchies, and false authority remain intact because nothing has disrupted their illusion of control. But visible faith interrupts, it confronts, it confounds. God uses what can be seen to dismantle what has been falsely exalted. The proud depend on predictability. They rely on intimidation, reputation, and the assumption that no one will challenge them openly. They are comfortable when faith stays theoretical, polite, and unseen. But when someone obeys God publicly, without permission, without apology, it destabilizes the structure pride built. Visible faith does not argue, it demonstrates. God never asks you to confront the proud verbally, He asks you to obey visibly. Obedience becomes the confrontation. Your action exposes what words never could. The proud are undone not by debate, but by evidence. This is why God insists that certain acts of faith must be seen, not because He wants to shame anyone, but because pride collapses when confronted with undeniable alignment. When God moves through visible obedience, human boasting loses credibility. The proud depend on image. Faith depends on trust. When you obey publicly, you are declaring that reputation does not govern you. Approval does not guide you. Fear does not dictate your timing. And that declaration disrupts those who have built their influence on controlling perception. Pride is threatened by obedience. It cannot manipulate. Visible faith also exposes false strength. Many who appear powerful are sustained only because no one has dared to move differently in front of them. But when you step out in obedience, their power is tested and often found hollow. God delights in this contrast, not because He enjoys humiliation, but because He opposes pride and gives grace to the humble. Visible faith creates a stage where this principle plays out naturally. No announcement is needed, no explanation required. The results speak. When God honors visible faith, it becomes impossible for the proud to claim credit. The timing is wrong, the method is wrong, the person is wrong. Nothing aligns with human logic, and that is exactly the point. The proud are confounded because the outcome cannot be traced to them. This is why God often chooses unlikely vessels for visible obedience. Not the loudest, not the most credentialed, not the most accepted. He chooses those who will obey without posturing. Their simplicity dismantles arrogance more effectively than confrontation ever could. Visible faith also removes hiding places. The proud hide behind complexity, explanations, and status. But when God responds to simple obedience, all of that becomes irrelevant. Complexity is exposed as unnecessary. Status is exposed as fragile. Pride is exposed as empty. Your visible faith does not attack anyone, but it reorders authority. Suddenly, influence shifts. Respect changes direction. Attention moves away from self made strength toward God activated obedience, and the proud feel it immediately. They may mock, they may minimize, they may resist, but internally they are shaken because something just proved them wrong without saying a word. God uses visible faith to settle arguments. He never intended you to fight. When you obey publicly, you step out of comparison. You are no longer competing for validation. You are simply aligned, and alignment always outperforms arrogance. Quietly, efficiently, publicly. The proud cannot stand what they cannot control. Visible faith introduces an element they did not anticipate, divine response. They know how to manage people. They know how to suppress opposition. But they do not know how to contend with God, responding openly to obedience. That is why the instruction must be public. If it were private, pride would remain untouched. If it were hidden, arrogance would continue unchecked. But when God responds in the open, the illusion of supremacy breaks. This is not about proving yourself right. It is about revealing God's authority. God does not need your obedience to be impressive. He needs it to be visible. Visibility transfers the weight of credibility from you to Him. And when God takes the stage, human pride steps back, whether willingly or not. There are people who have dismissed you, underestimated you, or positioned themselves above you. Not because they are stronger, but because your obedience has remained unseen. The moment you act publicly, the hierarchy shifts, not by force, by fruit. Visible faith also frees you from defending yourself. Once God responds openly, explanations become me unnecessary. Arguments fall silent, accusations lose power. Pride has nothing to hold on to when evidence stands in front of everyone. God confounds the proud by making their certainty obsolete. They were sure you would not move, sure you would stay silent, sure you would hesitate, sure you would conform. And when you don't, when you obey publicly, their assumptions collapse. Assumptions are the foundation of pride. When visible faith breaks assumptions, pride destabilizes. Confidence rooted in superiority falters. Control rooted in intimidation weakens. Influence rooted in fear dissolves. This is why obedience must not be delayed. The longer visible faith is postponed, the longer pride maintains its illusion. But the moment obedience is released, God responds swiftly, not slowly, not subtly, swiftly, because the point is clarity. God wants it to be clear who is in charge, clear where authority comes from, clear that obedience, not ego, moves heaven. Your role is not to confront the proud. Your role is to obey God where it can be seen. God handles the rest, and He does it thoroughly. Visible faith becomes a dividing line. Some will humble themselves, others will harden. But either way, truth is revealed. Alignment becomes obvious. Resistance exposes itself. This is why God says, "Let all see," because pride thrives in shadows, but it collapses in light. Your obedience is the light. And when that light shines, God ensures the contrast is unmistakable.